Chapter 15. The keepers. They branded guilty. By the time the Luminar returned to Violia, the lie had arrived before us. I saw it from the upper deck while the ship was still turning into the palace berth. White broadsheets had been pasted along the harbor arches, on the route office pillars, even on the public notice frames near the lower market lifts. Too many to be private rumor, too cleanly placed to be panic done in haste. Official paper. Official ink, official hands. The morning light had not fully burned through the cloud cover yet. That helped the sheets stand out all the more. White rectangles nailed against pale stone, fluttering in the rout wind like little flags of surrender. Someone expected the city to salute. Felix saw them a heartbeat after I did. He went so still beside the chart rail that even Marcus turned. Then Felix swore. Not scholars' irritation. Not deckweather language. Something old and earnest and furious enough to sound almost like grief. Marcus looked toward the notices and his mouth flattened. He moved first. Julian came up from the route table before anyone answered. He had not slept on the return crossing. None of us had, not properly. The boundary ruin still lived behind my eyes in flashes of white crystal and falling stone, and the chamber hidden beneath it had left all of us carrying more truth than the capital had ever intended to hold at once. Yet seeing the broadsides waiting on the harbor walls hollowed the tiredness out of me and replaced it with something colder. The nearest sheet was too far to read clearly from the deck. I did not need to. I knew before we docked what shape it would take. Oren would never print a scream if a measured sentence could do more damage. The mooring clamps took hold with a jolt that ran through the hull. Palace route officers were already waiting on the berth in dark coats with the route insignia at their collars and the careful grave expressions of men who wished to look as though this morning belonged to necessity and not design. Behind them, servants stood ready to receive the prints. Clerks held seal tubes and writing slates. 2 guards had been stationed at the gangway before the ship even fully settled. No welcome, only control. Marcus descended first, all hard lines and contained violence. Felix followed with the record case locked under one arm so tightly I thought he might crack the leather. Julian came after them in silence. I was last. The broadside nearest the gangway had been hung at eye level on a silver nail board meant for route advisories and harbor tax revisions. I stopped in front of it. The heading was printed in formal black. On the historical risk of Starweaver practices below that came a narrower line in smaller script, by Provisional Stewardship Review under Route Authority seal. My breath caught. The text beneath had been written by someone who knew exactly how to make poison look like procedure. It spoke of newly reviewed historical material, of tragic records from the age before route reform, of dangerous unsanctioned resonance methods employed by a now-defunct class of route artisans called star weavers, of an initiating fault in the old Western systems linked to improper cooperative binding outside administrative control, of the present need for caution while modern officials assessed possible surviving bloodline risk. Bloodline risk. There it was. Not subtle, not hidden in elegant suggestion. Printed and nailed where laborers, clerks, merchants, and servants would all read it before breakfast finished cooling in their mouths. At the bottom of the sheet, under the route authority seal, sat a line that made the dock sway under me, though I knew it did not truly move. Known surviving relevance under investigation includes the Belrose maternal line. For one heartbeat I could not hear anything. Not the creak of moorings. Not the calls from the lower dock. Not Felix hissing something ragged through his teeth. Only the paper in front of me and the way the letters cut. My mother's name had lived buried in the hand. Now they had dragged my house out into the street and nailed it to a board under official wax. Julian stepped close enough that his coat brushed my sleeve. He did not reach for the paper. He did not reach for me either, not with the whole berth watching. He only stood there and read the line at the bottom while the silence around him changed shape. That is not a review, he said quietly. It is a verdict. One of the waiting route officers bowed at once, too quickly. Your Highness, the Council has assembled for emergency session. Minister Vailcourt requested. Julian turned his head. That was all. Only that. The officer lost the rest of the sentence like a dropped tool. Marcus took the broadside down in one brutal movement, crumpled it once, then smoothed it flat again with visible effort as if destroying evidence outright would please him too much to be safe. Felix had already stripped a second copy from the farther board and was reading it with a face gone bloodless under fury. Around us, the berth had gone quieter than ordinary work silence. Not empty. Listening. A servant at the end of the dock looked away too late. 2 cargo clerks by the public stair had clearly been reading a different copy before we arrived and now could not decide whether to stare at the prince or at me. One chose me. The other looked instantly ashamed and did not stop looking anyway. I folded my hands into my sleeves so no one would see them shaking. The officer found his voice again. The Council seeks immediate route and public safety guidance, Your Highness. Public safety. That too had been chosen carefully, Julian said. Then they can begin by explaining who authorized this to circulate before the evidence lock from the boundary ruin was even broken in formal review. No one answered him. No one could. He looked down once at the broadside in Marcus's hand, then at the waiting route officers. No one touches Miss Belrose's person, effects, or room without my direct order. The officer bowed lower. Yes, Your Highness. It was a promise worth exactly as much as the men above him wished it to be. I knew that. Julian knew it too. That was why the line in his shoulders had not eased. We crossed the berth under witness. Not ceremony now. Not route chaos either. Something worse than both. Formal space poisoned by open reading. Everywhere we passed within the harbor quarter, copies of the broadside had already found their places. At the lower arch one had been pinned crookedly and hastily, as if a clerk had been made to work before his first tea. At the stair to the palace service lane another hung neatly under glass. Servants carrying laundry bundles slowed just enough to see me. A gardener near the fountain court crossed himself in the old island way when he thought no one higher-ranking was looking. Belrose maternal line. Bloodline risk. The words sat under my skin like splinters driven too deep to grip. The council chamber had been rearranged again. More seats. Less breathing room. No route flowers on the side tables. No decorative trays of fruit or sweet wine pretending urgency could remain civil if fed properly. The broadside lay on the central table in 3 copies, each weighted at the corners with crystal markers as if it were a chart worthy of study rather than a public wound. Around it had gathered the same kinds of people who always appear when kingdoms smell weakness and call it concern. The Lord Chancellor, senior route officials, Western merchants, several nobles who had not cared enough about the route crisis to attend earlier sessions and now somehow found time because bloodline panic suited their schedules. Lady Vivienne sat at the long side bench in dark morning silk, gloves folded in her lap, expression unreadable except for the stillness in it that I had learned meant active displeasure. Oren stood at the far end of the room as if he had been grown there. He bowed to Julian when we entered. Your Highness. Julian did not bow back. He took the nearest copy of the broadside from the table, tore the route seal strip clean off the bottom, and dropped it in front of Oren. Who authorized public release? Not a question. A demand wrapped in enough control to make it more dangerous. The room held its breath. Oren folded his hands before him. A provisional notice was deemed necessary when evidence from the boundary site confirmed surviving Starweaver line relevance and public rumor had already begun attaching Miss Belrose's name to unstable route events. The calm in his tone made me want to put a knife through the polished route map at his elbow. Julian's voice had gone very quiet. You printed an accusation before formal review. I printed caution before panic filled the gap, Oren said. The city saw the burst line over the palace gardens. The papers were already running with their own versions. Merchant confidence, Julian said, does not outrank truth. No, Oren replied. But it can collapse faster. There was the room. There was the machine. Truth mattered. Only not if it endangered control. Felix came to the table and laid down the locked record case with enough force that the crystal weights jumped. The drifting aisle basin showed a stewardship cut to the accident record. We have copied proof of tampering. The old command system, not the woven line, broke the Western braids. Oren turned to him with almost fatherly regret, which made me hate him more than open contempt ever had. And as I have said repeatedly, damaged memory structures are not always sequentially reliable. Felix looked ready to commit a scholarly murder with his bare hands. Marcus stepped between them before the room could enjoy the spectacle. He placed the wrapped sealant scrap from the burst lamp sabotage beside the record case, then another packet and another witness statements, line inspection names, physical compound sample. He did it methodically, like a man laying blades on a table one by one. The upper conservatory lamp was tampered with using office-grade archival sealant, he said. 2 line hands saw an office sub-inspector reseal the housing under special instruction. The sabotage was real. The Lord Chancellor, already pale from lack of sleep and too much truth, rubbed one hand across his brow. Then why publish this now? Oren answered before anyone else. Because sabotage does not erase hazard. The old records and the current incidents together suggest that surviving Starweaver response methods are unstable in stressed capital systems. Whether those methods were then also exploited by bad actors is a second question. There it was. The turn. Always the turn. He did not deny sabotage. He folded it into the account he wanted. Yes, someone tampered with the lamp, but only because my kind of work was already a dangerous material worth weaponizing. Yes, the past was cut, but even the uncut past, he suggested, pointed to us as a hazard the realm should have reason to fear. Julian's hands were flat on the table now, the torn seal strip between them. You will stop calling my evidence a second question, he said. Oren met his gaze evenly. And you will stop pretending the city can be asked to separate technical nuance from visible pattern in a single morning. A Western merchant with weather still in the seams of his coat said, "Visible pattern is a lovely phrase for convenient blame." 2 nobles at the rear shifted with immediate annoyance at a merchant daring tone in a room built for gentler lies. I stood through all of this with the broadside's lower line still burning against the inside of my eyes. Balrose. Bloodline risk. The room saw me only when it wanted to name me. Otherwise it spoke around me as if my body were merely the place where its argument happened to stand. Then a route advisor from the North Quarter said the thing everyone else had been circling. Until the matter is resolved, he said carefully, Miss Belrose should be removed from active route sites. Silence sharpened. There it was. At last. He continued under the momentum of having already committed. Not as punishment. Only containment. For her safety and the city's. No contact with major lamps, old stations, or crown lines until formal review concludes. A second voice joined him. Then a third. Not all at once. Never all at once. That is how rooms like this make cruelty feel inevitable instead of chosen. A lady from one of the inner houses spoke of public reassurance. A route officer spoke of temporary isolation protocols. A palace steward, the very picture of mild concern, suggested restricted movement within the royal guest wing and supervised handling of any craft implements until the old techniques could be better understood. Supervised handling of any craft implements. They meant my hands. They just had the decency not to say so plainly. Julian straightened from the table. No. The word cracked through the careful little pile of proposals like a dropped weight. No one stopped. That was the worst part. Oren spoke into the strain immediately, not too quickly, just fast enough to keep the room from reorganizing around Julian's refusal. Your Highness, no one seeks indignity. But after the burst lamp, after the broadside release, after the boundary evidence, which you released before review, after all that, Oren continued as if not interrupted, your personal attachment cannot be the governing standard. The room saw it then, not because it had not suspected, because he had named it, personal attachment. The phrase moved across the chamber like smoke, touching every face differently, some with interest, some with satisfaction, some with discomfort. Vivienne did not move at all. Marcus's expression went hard enough to bruise glass. Felix looked as if he wanted to bite Oren directly through the throat. My own body went cold and hot in the same breath. Because this was a trap, not only to isolate me, to make Julian defend me visibly enough that his judgment could be called compromised, to make him choose between me and his political authority until even his refusal became another lever they could pull against him. Julian's voice, when it came, had gone flatter than rage. My judgment remains clearer than anyone's in this room who thinks printing her house line on a public notice was restraint. The Lord Chancellor finally spoke, weary and sharp both. Enough. We are not here to enjoy each other's injuries. A lie. That was exactly why half the room had come. He turned toward me then for the first time since the session began, and I saw in his face not hostility but the bureaucratic grief of a man who wished kingdoms could survive without human beings in them. Miss Belrose, he said, would you voluntarily remain off the active route network until these findings are reconciled? Not an order. Worse, a request shaped to look reasonable. If I refused, I became volatile. If I accepted, I became the thing they said needed containment. The room watched. Julian watched. Oren watched most carefully of all. I thought of the old chamber below the boundary ruin, the great route seal above the capital. The line or life is spent. The gallery dial. The name-bearing crown pattern. The proof under the city. The words they were already trying to soften into something safe. I also thought of Julian in the council room, standing up in front of all of them and refusing the marriage trap. I thought of what that had cost him already. I thought of the way Oren had just said personal attachment and the room had taken the hook with such eager little hands. And because I was already bleeding inside from the broadside and the burst lamp and the eyes on me from every corner of the chamber, I saw the next move with a clarity that hurt. If I stayed here while they pressed, Julian would keep refusing, and every refusal would cost him authority they meant to reroute straight into Oren's hands. My throat tightened. I made myself swallow it. I would remain away from active route lines, I said. Julian turned so fast the motion snapped the silence around us. Cora, I could not look at him. Not yet. If I did, I would not finish. Until formal review, I said, still to the Lord Chancellor, but not under guard and not as if I've confessed to your broadside. A murmur moved through the room. Too little for Oren, too much for some of the nobles. A compromise only because I had carved it myself with blood still wet under my skin. The Lord Chancellor looked at Julian, who looked back at him with such contained fury I thought the old man might age another year in place. Oren's eyes narrowed by a degree. He had wanted a cage. I had handed them a room with the door open instead. Voluntary restraint, the Chancellor said at last, grasping the half-victory because rooms like his worship anything that lets them adjourn with fewer screams. Very well. Very well. The phrase made me suddenly want to laugh until I vomited. The rest of the meeting blurred after that. Not because I lost sense. Because the pain grew too large for detail to matter evenly. Marcus forced the sealant evidence into formal holding despite Oren's efforts to absorb it into office review. Felix nearly broke a route clerk by reciting the boundary chamber lines so coldly the man forgot his own title halfway through an objection. Vivienne said little, but once, when a noblewoman used the phrase *unfortunate inherited volatility*, Vivienne turned her head just enough that the woman went pink and shut up. Julian fought every inch, not theatrically, relentlessly. He refused the term isolation every time it returned. He refused Oren's attempt to move the witness names into ministerial custody. He refused the suggestion that I be relocated to sealed guest rooms closer to the route chamber for convenience. Each refusal bought me space. Each refusal cost him. By the time the council finally dispersed, everyone in the room knew it. He was being cornered, not by one grand move, by the accumulation of many small reasonable ones. That is how power takes a man built for honor, not with the sword, with enough polite necessity that everyone else can call the fall consensus. I did not stay to watch them keep working him under. I went to my room because if I remained in those corridors 1 minute longer, I would either break or become cruel in ways the palace would enjoy explaining about my blood. The guest chamber had never looked less like a place I could belong. Too tidy, too pale, too soft around the edges. A cage made by people who thought comfort solved the moral issue of walls. I shut the door and stood with my back against it until my knees stopped threatening me. Somewhere out in the corridor, servants moved with hushed urgency and messages passed under seal. The city beyond the window had fully awakened now. From this height I could see one of the public notice boards near the lower stair and knew, without squinting, exactly what white sheet hung there. I crossed to the writing table and opened the lowest drawer. Inside lay my mother's needle box. Master Alara had packed it into my things the first night I came to the palace, and I had never fully unpacked it again. Brass corners worn smooth from years of hands. Dark wood rubbed pale at the lid edges. The latch had a habit of catching on one side before it yielded. When I opened it, the smell of old thread, dried cedar, and a trace of resin rose out so suddenly my eyes burned. I sat down hard in the chair. Inside, everything was as it had been. Fine needles in the felt strip, 3 tiny spools of silver thread wrapped in cloth, a packet of old star-glass dust folded in oiled paper, a few pressed blossom petals gone fragile with age, and beneath the tray, where the hidden false bottom lifted if one knew the catch, the unfinished crown. I had not looked at it in years. My mother had left it incomplete when she died. Not because she had meant to, because death is rude and stops hands in the middle of work without asking what they were building. The crown was only half bound. One side carried white blooms, now long dried to thin ivory ghosts, and the hidden silver crossing beneath them was denser than any common workshop pattern. The other side remained bare ring and waiting thread. I used to think of it as the saddest object in the world. Then I learned enough to know it was also a message. I lifted it out carefully. The old silver felt cool and alive in my hands in the way only true work does, even unfinished, even after years. My mother had been going somewhere with this crown. Not a customer piece. Not festival wear. The inner turns were too complex, the pause intervals too deliberate. A name-bearing work perhaps. Or the beginning of one. Hand if name must be buried. I pressed the unfinished crown to my lap and finally let myself bow over it. No sobbing. No graceful tears. Only the deep shaking sort of pain that comes when a person has held upright too long in the wrong room and can no longer afford the spine of it. He was being trapped. Because of me, because of them, because of the old roads, because of all the structures that wanted him manageable and me gone. If I stayed, he would keep standing between me and the room until they found a way to call that betrayal of duty instead of proof of character. If I let them contain me in the guest wing, Oren would use my stillness as admission and Julian's anger as proof he could not govern himself where I was concerned. If I did nothing, the broadside would become my shape in the city before truth ever reached it. I did not know what to do. Then the answer came all at once, simple enough to feel cruel. Leave. Not forever. The thought of forever hit me so hard I almost rejected the whole idea on the spot. Only long enough to break the trap. long enough to stop them from using my body in the palace as leverage against him while I found the next thing the hidden line wanted from me. Long enough to go where they would least expect me to move next, down, not up. Back to the workshop quarter. Back to the hands that knew me before rout chambers and broadside boards tried to rename me. It felt like losing something even before I stood. That was how I knew it was real. A knock came at the door. I froze. Not because I feared Oren. Because some animal part of me thought if it was Julian and he came in with those tired eyes and that impossible steadiness, I would never leave. The knock came again. Measured. Not servant fast. Not Julian either. Too controlled. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand, set the unfinished crown gently in the open box, and opened the door. Vivienne stood there. She had changed since the council into a travel dark day gown and a short-fitted jacket suitable for moving through palace corridors without trailing half the room's opinion after her. Her hair was still perfectly arranged, which somehow made the tiredness in her face more visible instead of less. She looked at me once, took in my expression, the open needle box on the table behind me, and the truth of the room in one sweep. "So," she said quietly, "you've chosen." It was not a question. I appreciated her for that more than I could have explained. "Yes." She stepped inside when I moved back, shut the door herself, and crossed to the table where the unfinished crown lay in the box. She did not touch it. She only looked. "That's hers," she said. Again, not a question. I nodded. Vivienne's gaze remained on the unfinished work for a long breath. "Then you were always carrying more than the room deserved." I laughed once through the last of the rawness in my throat. "That sounds almost kind. I am trying not to be sentimental." "Don't make it difficult." She turned then and leaned one hip against the writing table, elegant even in fatigue, and studied me with the sort of level seriousness men in council rooms often mistook for coldness because they could not imagine women carrying thought without turning it into softness. "Julian is still in the rout chamber," she said. "Oren wants the restraint terms formalized in writing. The Chancellor wants market assurances before noon. 3 Western houses are already asking what your temporary absence from active route work means for his authority." "There," I said, "that sounds more like the palace." "It is the palace." She did not soften it. Why should she? I closed the needle box, then opened it again because I had forgotten the little wrapped storm tower circlet and could not bear to leave it. My hands were steadier now that the decision had shape. "Will he know?" I asked. Vivienne's answer came after just enough pause to prove she respected the question. "Yes. Not before you're gone, if I can help it." Pain lanced through me sharp and clean. I had asked for exactly that. I still hated hearing it. Vivienne watched me wrap the unfinished crown in cloth and place it at the bottom of my satchel beside the needle box. "I could stop you," she said. I looked up. "I know." She shook her head once. "No, I don't mean by force. I could tell you this will wound him. I could tell you Oren will call it admission. I could tell you staying beside him and letting the palace do its worst is the braver shape of love." Her mouth went flat around the word as if she mistrusted even saying it in rooms like these. All of that would be partly true and mostly useless. I had not expected mercy from her. What she offered was more exact. "I'm not leaving because I'm frightened of him choosing," I said quietly. "I'm leaving because they are using the choosing itself as a weapon." Vivienne's eyes sharpened with something like approval. "Yes." The word steadied me more than comfort would have. I buckled the satchel, checked the linen packet with the sealant scrap, slipped my mother's brass scissors into the side pocket, and tied the satchel strap crosswise over my shoulder. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the objects inside. Because of what they meant. When I turned back, Vivienne had taken something from inside her sleeve, a folded route pass marked with one of the older internal seals. "The East Service Court is less watched than the main guest stairs," she said. You can reach the lower courier lift without crossing the public route hall. One of my maids will walk 2 corridors behind you. If anyone asks, she has mistaken you for a conservatory clerk on errand. I stared at the pass. You came prepared. I have lived in this palace a long time, she said. I have learned to travel with exits. That made me want, absurdly and painfully, to laugh and cry at once. I took the pass. At the door I hesitated. Not because of the route out. Because leaving this room made the choice irreversible. Vivienne saw it. Of course she did. Say what you need to say now, she said. You won't get a kinder audience from the corridor. I looked down at my hand on the latch. When he finds out, I said, they'll tell him I fled because I was guilty. Or weak. Or ashamed. They will try. I'm none of those. No, she said. You aren't. I turned to her fully then. The woman the court had offered as his solution. The woman he had refused to use. The woman who had found me in the conservatory and given me the gallery key and now stood in my room, not stopping me. Why are you helping me? I asked. Vivienne held my gaze without flinching. Because Oren likes problems best when they stay on the table, she said. I prefer mine mobile. A beat. And because if you are what the old records say you are, then leaving now is not surrender. It is movement. My throat tightened again. She saw that too, and because she was kinder than her face first allowed and more ruthless than most men in council would ever understand, she added the thing that let me survive the final step. I won't stop him from being angry, she said. But I will stop them from using your absence as consent. I went still. That was the promise. Not soft. Not impossible. Exactly the sort of thing only a woman like her could credibly give. You can do that? I asked. One dark brow lifted the smallest degree. I can do many things when insulted properly. There it was. The blade hidden in silk. Not at me. Never at me. I nodded once because if I tried for more, something in my face might break. We left by the East Service Court. No dramatic music. No running through rain. No final look from the top of the palace stairs with route lines flashing like prophecy. Only narrow corridors of white stone, cooler than the public halls and far less adorned. A service arch where 3 footmen bowed to Vivienne and did not dare inspect the route pass in my hand. A silent maid carrying folded linens 2 corridors behind us like a shadow with excellent posture. One kitchen stair that smelled of bread and hot copper. Then the lower courier lift, little more than a caged platform and a chain pulley column running down toward the middle terraces. At the lift landing, Vivienne stopped. This was the place, then. The last seam between palace and departure. Between waiting to be used and moving under my own will. She looked at the satchel, then at my face, and whatever she saw there she took seriously enough not to decorate with false encouragement. When you come back, she said, come back with something they cannot turn into rumor. Not if. When? I swallowed hard enough to hurt. I will. She stepped back from the lift gate and laid one gloved hand on the latch wheel. N. Belrose, she said. It was the first time she had used my name without title or distance. I looked at her. I meant what I said in the conservatory, she said. Do not help them make your guilt for you. Then she set the lift in motion. The palace rose away above me in white ribs and stone shafts as the platform descended. One level. Then another. The service lights thinning. The open air returning in colder drafts. The city widening below into roofs and smoke and the hard, practical lines of the world that had made me before palaces started printing my bloodline onto public boards. I kept one hand on the satchel strap the whole way down. Needle box. Unfinished crown. Stormed tower circlet. Sealant scrap. All of it with me. At the middle terrace transfer lane, I stepped off the lift and did not look back at once. Not because I was brave. Because I was not. Only when the platform had already started rising again did I turn. The palace stood above the city like a white answer to a question no one honest had asked. Its towers were pale in the noon light. The route lines over it looked calm from here. Deceptively calm. Somewhere inside those walls Julian still stood in the route chamber or another room like it, bleeding authority one measured refusal at a time while Orin arranged concern around the wound. I put my face toward the workshop quarter and started walking. By the time he learned I was gone, I would already be below the highest terraces, back where roofs ran close and stairways turned practical and people did not bow unless they meant gratitude or debt. The palace shrank behind me with every step. It still hurt. It hurt so badly I thought it might stop me if I let myself feel all of it at once. So I didn't. I walked. And under the weight of my mother's unfinished crown, the little wrapped storm circlet, and the promise Vivienne had made in a palace corridor, I went back toward the only place in the kingdom that had ever taught me how to build something with my own hands. Chapter 16. As if I were better gone by the time I reached the workshop quarter, my legs had forgotten whether they were carrying me home or dragging me somewhere I had no right to return. The middle terraces always smelled of work before they looked like it. Resin first, then wet rope, then hot metal from repair braziers, then the sweeter thinner scents that belonged to my own trade stem sap, bruised petals, drying herbs, old ribbon boxes, lamp oil warmed by hands and not by chandeliers. Palace air never admitted what it was made of. The workshop quarter always did. The route down from the upper service lift cut through 3 levels of the city before reaching our street. At each landing I passed one more public board with the broadside on it. The same stiff official script. The same black seal line. The same phrase that made my jaw clench so hard my teeth hurt. Bloodline risk. By the second board, someone had already drawn ink across the lower margin where my house line was printed. Not enough to blot it out. Just one hard sideways slash, as if anger and shame had shared a pen and neither finished the job. The lower I went, the less elegant the staring became. In the upper palace quarter, people knew how to look without letting their necks move. Here, in the lived-in middle streets, a fishmonger's wife stared openly from under her scarf while rearranging baskets. A pair of runner boys paused mid-argument and watched me pass with the flat, bright curiosity children reserve for fires and noble scandal. One old ribbon seller I had known since I was 12 opened her mouth as if to call my name, thought better of it, and touched 2 fingers to her brow instead. Not fear. Something rougher. The sort of respect people give the newly unlucky because they know luck changes districts faster than rent does. The street to Belrose and Alara sat where it always had, between the glass bead mender and the stairwell that led up toward the old dyer's roofs. The signboard hung a little crooked because the left chain had stretched in winter and Master Alara refused to pay anyone to straighten what a hammer and temper could manage. The front shutters were open. White work cloths hung inside to catch the light. On any other day, I would have seen the place and felt my shoulders loosen automatically. Instead, I stopped under the awning and looked through the open front as if I were a customer considering whether to cross the threshold. My work table was exactly where I had left it. 3rd from the left wall, under the shelf of mineral jars, near enough to the drying rack that I could turn and judge bloom quality without moving 3 steps for nothing. My knife rest sat on the far edge. The old chipped glaze bowl for stem clippings rested beside it. A length of pale ribbon still hung from the hook under the table lip where I had shoved it 3 mornings ago before leaving for the palace delivery that had broken my life open. The palace's white halls, the ballroom, the rout chamber, the drifting aisle, the hidden gallery, every impossible thing I had walked through since then seemed, for one stupid heartbeat, like fever. Something too bright and strange to belong to the same body now standing in front of that table. Then Master Ilara's voice came from the back room. If you plan to stand there until dusk, at least do it without blocking the light. The sound of her nearly finished me. I stepped inside before my face could do anything treacherous. The shop had changed and not changed at all. Racks of ribbon still lined the side wall in careful color progression because Master Ilara believed disorder in stock was moral decline in visible form. The drying rods over the rear counter still held half-finished floral loops and herb bundles. The front display still bore 6 crowns in varying degrees of ornament, though 2 of the spaces where richer commission pieces should have sat now held plainer work wrapped for lower-rain weddings and 1 emergency mourning ring of dark ribbon and frostleaf. That last detail struck harder than I expected. Trade strain changes beauty first. Not by removing it, by making it simpler, smaller, cheaper to grieve with. Master Ilara came out from behind the curtain carrying a basket of wilted moonvine and looked at me once from boots to hairline. She took in the satchel, the soot still caught in one cuff, the shadows under my eyes, the way I was holding myself too carefully around the hurt in my shoulder. Nothing in her face softened. "You're late," she said. I laughed then, because if I hadn't I might have sat down on the floor and started crying against the ribbon shelves like a child. "Yes," I said. "I think I took the longer road." Clearly. She set the basket down, crossed the room, and put one rough resin-scented hand against my cheek for one hard heartbeat. Not a caress. Verification. Temperature, perhaps. Solvency. Then she turned away before I could make anything of it and pointed at the work table. "Sit if you're going to collapse. Work if you're going to be dramatic somewhere useful." My throat tightened so fast it hurt. "You always know exactly what to say." "That's because no one pays me for kindness." She eyed the satchel. "Put your things down. We've got stem rot in the back because the West shipment sat too long again, and if the world insists on ending, it can at least end after we salvage what still has value." That was a welcome. Not embrace. Not pity. Work. I loved her enough in that moment to have followed her into hell if she had called it inventory. I set the satchel by my chair and went to the back room with her. The workroom heat hit me first, then the damage. 3 crates of rout lilies sat open on the sorting table. Their petals had gone transparent at the edges from too much delay in damp wrapping. 2 bundles of frostbell had browned at the stems before reaching full bloom. The moonvine basket Master Ilara had carried was only the beginning. A whole row of lower-value flowers had already been stripped for salvage petals because their stems would never hold a crown now. On the far side of the room, the ledger lay open under a weight stone, and even from where I stood I could see too many crossed-out orders and revised prices in Master Ilara's blunt hand. "The west line held after Glassmere," I said. "It held better," she corrected. "Not enough." She thrust a stripping knife into my hand and nodded toward the lilies. "Merchants kept back half their stock after the broadside. Customers are nervous. Weddings don't stop, but they get poorer in style while people pretend it's taste." I moved to the table by instinct and began trimming blackened lily edges away from the usable white. "Under. Turn. Save what can still answer." "Did people say much?" I asked. Of course they said much. Master Ilara sorted moonvine without looking at me. Some came in curious. Some frightened. One fool asked if you could curse a husband by weaving his name wrong into a ribbon knot. She snorted. I told him if he wanted a curse, marriage would do it cheaper. A sound escaped me that might have been a laugh if laughter had not become such a complicated motion. She glanced at me then, sideways and sharp. "They also asked whether you were safe." That landed somewhere tender enough to ache. I stripped another ruined petal edge and kept my eyes on the work. "What did you say?" "That you were stubborn, which covers many situations." We worked in silence after that. Not the strained kind. The ordinary workshop silence built out of hand movement, clipped stems, and small necessary sounds. Knife against board. Thread spool turning. Petals collecting in the salvage bowl. The front door bell chimed twice with customers and once with a delivery boy carrying only half the preservative oil we'd ordered because the North Lane had repriced everything before noon. Through the wall I could hear Master Alara's trade voice, dry, exact, unimpressed by anyone's feelings unless they came with coin or honest need. I had missed that voice so fiercely I nearly cut my thumb. By the time the first shift of light moved from the back wall to the floor, we had turned 3 damaged lily bundles into enough salvage for 6 smaller rings and 1 decent central bridal piece if I had the heart to make it delicate. I did not. Everything in my hands came out stronger than usual, harder at the lines. Master Ilara noticed. Of course she did. You're pulling too tight, she said. I'm not. She set down her half-finished morning loop and came to my table. Cora. I hated the way my own hands looked under hers then. Clever and stupid and bruised by too many kinds of work at once. The stems will split if you keep binding like you want to throttle someone, she said quietly. I let the silver go slack. There are griefs that cry. Others harden. Mine had chosen the second shape and was taking my craft with it. I sat back and rubbed 2 fingers over my brow. The room swam for a moment, not faintness, only tiredness deep enough to tug the edges of sight. Through the open back window, I could hear the lower street in its midday rhythm. Carts. Voices. Someone selling broth dumplings from the stair corner. A child laughing somewhere far too freely for the day I was having. Master Ilara looked at the broadside folded once and wedged under the oil weight at the edge of the ledger. I hadn't seen her place it there. She touched the paper with 1 knuckle and said, I burned 2 copies. Kept 1 to spit on if needed. A bitter smile pulled at my mouth despite myself. Efficient. I'm a professional. She studied me a moment longer. Are you going to tell me what actually happened, or am I meant to guess from the public version and your face? I exhaled slowly. So I told her. Not every room in full. Not the ballroom music or the exact silver of the hidden gallery or the way the drifting aisle had looked when Dawn first gave it shape. Those parts would have required too much of me to say aloud just then. But enough. Glasmer. The buried station. The drifting aisle basin. Belrose named among the woven houses. The cut record. The stewardship line. The great route seal over the Capitol. The burst lamp trap. The broadside. The council room trying to fold me into danger and Julian into weakness. I did not tell her what he had said in the storm tower. I did not tell her what he had promised in the gallery. Those I kept where they already hurt. Master Ilara listened without interruption, which for her was the highest possible form of mercy. When I finished, she sat on the stool opposite mine and looked down at her own work-scarred hands for a while before speaking. Your mother knew more than she told me, she said. I went still. I knew that before today, she went on. Not because she bragged. She never did. But because now and then she would see a pattern in a thing before anyone else had named it. A route shipment delayed 2 days before the clerks updated the board. A flour shipment refusing a common binding because the line around the quarter had gone tight that week. She always pretended it was instinct. I let her. Her mouth flattened slightly. I suppose I wanted instinct to be enough. It felt safer. It probably was, I said. Yes. The word held too much. She rose, crossed to the shelf over the drying rack and brought down a folded linen packet. Inside lay 3 old crown sketches in my mother's hand, the ones Master Ilara had kept after the funeral because she could not bear to throw them out and could not bear to look too long either. She left me these to finish from if I needed stock, Master Ilara said. I never copied the 3rd design. She handed me the top sheet. I knew at once which one she meant. Not because I had seen it before. Because the unfinished crown in my satchel had the same hidden logic in its half-bound side, an inner return turn where ordinary festive work would have gone straight. A place where one line left room for another to answer. Why not? I asked. Master Ilara gave me the sort of look that usually meant I was being foolish in a familiar direction. Because it felt like listening at a door. My throat tightened. The workroom had gone very still around us. Even the street noise outside seemed to recede for a moment, as if every ordinary sound in the city had politely stepped back from my mother's ghost. Master Ilara put the sketches down and nodded toward the satchel by my chair. The box. I frowned. The needle box. She nodded once. There's another catch under the lower false bottom. I stared at her. I had found the first false tray the day I left the palace. The unfinished crown. The extra silver. The old dust packet. I had thought that was the whole secret because the day had already been too full of knives to imagine one more hidden thing. There can't be, I said. Of course there can, she snapped. Your mother never did believe one hidden compartment was enough against determined men. Hope and dread moved through me at once so sharply I almost hated them. I took the satchel to the small side workbench where the light ran cleaner over the wood grain and drew out the needle box. My hands had gone clumsy. I made myself slow down. The box looked ordinary. Dark wood. Brass corners. The familiar inner tray and the first false bottom I already knew how to lift. I opened it. Removed the needles. Removed the silver spools. Lifted the false base and set aside the unfinished crown bundle that had lived beneath it. Nothing. I stared at the bare wood beneath the first hidden tray. Master Ilara came to stand at my shoulder. Turn it. I did. On the underside, near the back hinge line, 3 tiny flower marks had been carved into the wood grain so lightly I had always taken them for accident. Under direct side light, they aligned not as flowers at all but as rhythm points. Short, long, pause, the lullaby. My pulse kicked hard enough to make my fingers ache. I pressed the first mark. Nothing. The second. A tiny inward give. The third and then the first again in the rhythm of the song's opening phrase. A hidden spring clicked. The box floor slid sideways by less than a finger's width. For one absurd heartbeat I only stared, not at the compartment itself, at the sheer stubbornness of my mother building secrecy into a sewing box by rhythm and hand pattern, trusting song to survive where paper might not. Then I worked the sliding panel fully free. Inside, wrapped in old oilcloth, lay a folded vellum design packet and a sealed letter. My vision went thin at the edges, not because of the objects. Because the seal on the letter was not any house mark I knew, only a pressed ring made by 4 tiny thread turns crossed over one another in the shape of a hidden crown. My name was written on the outside, not Cora Belrose as the palace would write it, not even Cora in the casual workroom hand Master Ilara used when labeling my order bundles. To my little Bloom, if the road has reached you. I sat down so fast the stool scraped. Master Ilara stepped back without being asked. Another kind of mercy. She took the moonvine basket with her and went into the front room, leaving the curtain half open in case I needed to call and not a fraction more open than dignity allowed. I broke the seal. The paper inside had been folded so long that the creases resisted opening. My mother's hand met me at once clean, narrow strokes, not ornamental, a little slanted because she always wrote as if the page needed finishing faster than ink could dry. My little Bloom, if this letter has found your hands, then the road I hoped would stay sleeping has woken. I am sorry for that first, before all else. Not because the road is wrong, but because waking asks a price of those born close to it. I had to stop there and press my hand over my mouth. Her voice lived in the lines so clearly it made the air around the bench feel occupied. Not mystical nonsense. Not apparition. Just the terrible ordinary nearness of a person's mind preserved in strokes and pauses. I made myself keep reading. If the old crossings have started answering you, then I was right to leave teaching in the hand and not the name. A named thing can be hunted. A movement learned in the fingers can outlive a house fire, a decree, a cowardly court, and even a frightened mother. My eyes burned. I blinked hard and read on. Do not waste your life hating the crown for what stewards did beneath it. There are children born to high blood who inherit the wound as surely as we inherit the cut. If one of them reaches you and the road answers him true, look first at what he carries, not only at what he was born under. The words blurred. I knew, with the clean force of a knife entering familiar cloth, that she had not meant some abstract royal child of the future. She had meant the possibility exactly. A line wounded by the same cut. A crown child hearing too much. A person, not a symbol. Julian. I set the letter down for a moment because my hands had started shaking again and I could not bear to smudge her ink. Outside the front room, a customer laughed at something Master Ilara said in her driest trade tone. A chair leg scraped. Coins changed hands. Life, indecently, went on while my dead mother reached across years to name the shape of the choice I had been trying not to admit. I picked the letter up again. The song is not the end. It is the route. If you are reading this, then you must know the work I could not finish. What I leave you is not a bridal crown, though men looking at it may think so. It is a returning crown. It does not bind one vow only. It returns the spoken line to the one who answered, so that the road recognizes them as joined by will and not by command. If the great route must be opened again, this is the crown that answers the seal. My pulse thundered now. I read the rest without breathing properly. Do not finish it in my hand. You must complete the second side in your own terms, or it will carry only memory and not living answer. The hidden namework must be woven on the inner return. Not written, not spoken to idle ears. Woven by rhythm, by pause, by the truth of the names as you know them. You will be tempted to think leaving is kinder than standing beside a wound too large for one life. Do not mistake absence for mercy if the road still calls your step. What is unfinished in me must not become unfinished in you. The tears came then, not soft, not noble. They dropped straight onto the paper before I could stop them, and I swore aloud at myself and wiped them with the heel of my hand so clumsily that I nearly made it worse. The last lines were shorter. Beneath the second panel is the return draft. Use it only if the road has truly reached its crown. And Cora, if you must choose between being safely hidden and being necessary, choose with your own will. Never with their fear. Mama, I bowed over the letter and let the tears come properly then, one hand flat over my eyes and the other crushing the edge of my skirt in my fist so hard it would wrinkle for days. Not because I was weak, because she had known. Not everything, perhaps. Not the exact names or faces, but the shape, the cut, the danger, the possibility that one day the hidden line and the crown line would meet again through a child of her blood. And she had loved me enough to hide the answer instead of burying it with herself. After a while, I do not know how long, I lifted the second hidden panel. Beneath the letter compartment lay the design packet. Not one sketch. 3 layered vellum sheets, each worked over in silver ink and fine graphite in my mother's hand. The top showed the unfinished crown's first half, exactly as it existed in the wrapped bundle in my satchel. The second showed the complete inner structure, the hidden return turns laid opposite one another so the crown would answer both call and reply. The final sheet made my breath catch all over again. It was the great route opening crown. No title, no dramatic flourish. Only the pattern itself, larger than ordinary work and impossibly precise. Outer bloom placement aligned to the capital crown seal points. Inner silver returns marked for 2 distinct name rhythms. A central crossing unlike any I had ever woven, not because it was more ornate, but because it did not close. It folded back through itself and returned, leaving a living answer path where the ordinary wedding crown would simply bind and end. At the bottom edge, in my mother's neat hand, was one final notation. The vow must be returned, not taken. There it was. The last thing I had not yet known how to imagine with my hands. The route did not want possession. Not the crown taking the answerer. Not the royal line taking the woven one. Not marriage as house law or political seal. Return. Mutual line. Spoken accord given back and held. My tears stopped. Not because the pain eased. Because something steadier rose through it and took its place. I spread the design packet over the workbench and looked at the unfinished crown beside it, at the first half made in my mother's hand and the blank side waiting for mine. The whole work sat there like a door and a challenge both. I had left the palace to stop them using me against him. That part remained true. I had not been wrong to cut the trap where I could. But leaving could not be the end. Not with this in my hands. Not with the great rout seal over the capital and the old chamber warning what crown-only command would cost him. Not with my mother writing asterisk do not mistake absence for mercy if the road still calls your stepdaughter asterisk. Master Alara came back through the curtain then, took one look at my face and the open packet on the bench, and set a cup of tea down beside my elbow without pretending she had not heard me crying. That bad? She asked. I laughed once, watery and ugly and alive. That clear? She looked at the top design sheet, then the unfinished crown, then the letter in my hand. Her mouth hardened, not in cruelty but in the sort of resolve forged in women who have spent too long making small things survive large men's decisions. You're going back, she said. I looked up at her. Not because she was wrong. Because hearing it aloud made the room sharpen around the truth. Yes, I said. Not today. Not in a rush half made by grief. But yes. The answer had become a road now, not a wound. Master Alara nodded once, as if we had just settled a difficult order and not the shape of my life. Then cry faster. We've got work. That nearly made me laugh properly. I drank the tea. Wiped my face again. Spread the final design sheet flatter under the light. And for the first time since I walked out of the palace service court, I did not feel like a girl who had fled. I felt like a maker sitting down to finish the thing her dead mother had left open for her because one day the road would come asking in her own name. Outside, the workshop quarter carried on carts on the stones, bargaining voices, hammers from the bead mender next door, a baby wailing somewhere up the stairwell and being firmly ignored by a grandmother who knew children survived noise better than indulgence. Life did not pause because kingdoms chose badly. Inside, the unfinished crown lay between my mother's hand and mine. The final weaving method for the great rout opening spread across the bench in silver lines. And under all of it, steady as a held breath, ran the certainty that this was not the end of my leaving. It was the route back.